I was told as a kid, oh, you're just like your grandfather and you're going to be a runner. And very early in my life, that seed was planted. What they didn't tell me is that the other seed was planted was addiction. I had an incident in Wichita, Kansas, where I was, handcuffed and on the ground and police searching my car. And I realized I really had a choice to make between living and dying. It was no longer like metaphorical. It was literal and in front of me. And as I like to say, I chose running. And not only did running save my life, then it basically gave me a life.
I believe impact is so important to the what part of our lives, what we do. Impact is something that it's not just about leaving a legacy, it's about living that legacy. Walk us through a little bit of your journey so that people can understand, the baseline of somebody that battled addiction to really finding a passion that you've had your whole life, but something that really elevated you out to even a couple of the things that have happened that are quirks, things that just kind of popped up along the way.
No, it's a great place to start. And my friend Deepak Chopra says very often that you can motivate people. I'm sorry. See, I say it backwards every time. You can inspire people, but you actually can't motivate them. Like motivation is sort of an innate. Maybe you're born with it. I think people can develop it, but it's that inspiration. And for me, hopefully, what you'll hear today, and your listeners will hear, is inspiration very often comes through vulnerability and from telling people the hard stories, not the success. Success is wonderful and when you get it, but it's not always relatable. Struggle is very relatable to everybody because we all struggle. There's always times where we can't sure if we're going to go on. And that's certainly been the course of my life, which started here in North Carolina. We were just talking. You're in Virginia. I'm in Durham, North Carolina, and my parents were they were kids themselves. They were college students, 18 years old at University of North Carolina when I was born, and I grew up in a very adult world. No siblings. My parents divorced early, and my mom was in theater, and so I was kind of surrounded by cast parties and theater people and a lot of weed and
Yeah.
drinking and
In a
the
college
19
town,
exactly in the
too.
1960s, yeah, in the 60s. And my grandfather had been the head track coach at UNC Chapel Hill for 40 years when I was born, and he passed early in my life. But that's how legacy works a lot of times in families. As I was told as a kid, oh, you're just like your grandfather and you're going to be a runner. And very early in my life, that seed was planted. What they didn't tell me is that the other seed was addiction. And I was born a fourth generation, alcoholic addict. I mean, again, that's a provocative sentence. I didn't come out of the womb drinking, but once I discovered alcohol, or it discovered me as a teenager at Carolina, I realized that this was going to be something that at that point I felt like was going to be part of my life forever. Like I found that crutch, that warm feeling that I could count on because I'd grown up in a very uncertain world. And I like to say that my mom was awesome. She passed a few years ago, but I was lovingly neglected as a child. So it was just, she was busy doing her own thing, and I thought it just made me tough and a survivor. And what it really did was make me seek other things to give me comfort. So
Yep.
at Carolina, I basically flunked out of school after 3 years. I played basketball actually for a couple of years at Carolina when I was there in the early 80s with a guy named Michael Jordan and James Worthy and Sam Perkins and Roy Williams, the recently retired coach. He was my coach on the JV team. And so I got the amazing good fortune to be around some of these great players and kind of a distant part of the 82 championship team. And that still wasn't enough to keep me in school. And I basically flunked out, it was the cocaine decade, as I like to call the 80s. I did as much and as often as I could. And I spent 10 years basically moving around the country, getting a good job, becoming the top salesman, getting a new girlfriend, building a life, and for 6 months, and then spending the next 6 months driving it into the trash can and screwing it all up and going somewhere else and starting over.
Like a
And
self-sabotage. You think it was like a
always,
self-sabotage along the way? It was always like I would build it up, I would perform at the level that you would know you were born to, and then you would just start to, as you saw success, you would start to blow it up.
I had no purpose, Scott. I had no purpose. I was succeeding because I felt like if I was a top salesman, then nobody could question my other behaviors. Or, you can't fire the top salesman,
Right.
which by the way, absolutely is not true. Because, I would become such a pain in the ass for either not showing up or, whatever was going on that, I would be shown the door eventually. It just wasn't worth it. And uh, and I thought I found purpose when I was 29 years old. My first son was born, and I thought by that time I'd been to rehab, I'd been to AA, I'd been to church, I'd been everywhere that I knew of to try to stop these behaviors, and none of it had ever stuck. And that's because what I really wanted was something to force me to do it. I didn't have the courage at that point in my life to actually do it for myself. So at 29, the birth of my son made me feel like, okay, surely I can stop for him. But, and this is a good point to say, Scott, that everybody listening to this, you understand what addiction is about because you've either dealt with it yourself, you have a close family friend or a family member who's dealt with it, you've lost somebody to alcoholism or like everybody kind of knows in general what this is about, and you can't stop for somebody else. And I finally, a couple months into my son's life, I had an incident in Wichita, Kansas, where I was handcuffed and on the ground and police searching my car, and I've been awake for 6 days smoking crack and doing the deal. And I realized I really had a choice to make between living and dying. Like it was no longer like metaphorical, it was literal and in front of me. And as I like to say, I chose running. So, I went to an AA meeting that night, and I got up the next day and I went for a run. And I actually did those two things every day for 3 straight years without missing a day. I didn't say I was going to do it for 3 years. I just committed to one day at a time doing these two things and seeing how that would change my life. And not only did running save my life, then it basically gave me a life. And as you know, I went on then to run races all around the world. I became the senior producer for a TV show called Extreme Makeover Home Edition for many years, which a lot of your viewers will have watched. It was the number one show on TV for a lot of years.
It was a lot of fun to watch. That was a great
It,
show. It was one of
yeah,
those
it was.
shows, there's very few things you have that your family can all watch
Oh
together,
yes.
and your wife loves it because she sees the new designs, and you love it because it's a story of underdogs to success, and your
Always.
kids are like, "Oh, I can't wait to see how the kids' rooms turn out." It was great. Great
Yeah,
show.
made you feel like you could do anything, and that I was in such a positive space at that point. That was when I got this idea about running across the Sahara Desert and how, that would be a cool and interesting thing to do. And by that point, I'd run across like the Gobi Desert in China, the Atacama Desert in Chile, I'd run across jungles in Borneo and Vietnam and Fiji. And I mean, so I'd done some stuff. It's not like this was just out of thin air, but this was an audacious idea. The Sahara Desert's 5,000 miles. It's the most hostile terrain on the planet. And I took this idea to a friend who was a director, and he had won the Academy Award a couple years earlier, and he said yes. And a week later, he calls and says Matt Damon wants to produce and narrate the film, and he asked if that would be okay with me. And I'm like, I was really hoping for somebody better, but yeah, that would be all right.
How do you like them
And
apples?
yeah, right, exactly. Thank you. Good reference. And then, so suddenly I have a couple of, and maybe a lot of your listeners can relate to this. I'm an addict, which makes me one of the greatest salesmen on the planet, because that's what addicts are. We, by default, it's this constant convincing of people around us that I promise that's the last time, or whatever the stories we're telling. And they're not lies, because usually in the moment, we mean it, right? We mean it with our hearts, and then things get better or they get worse, and the whole cycle starts again. Well, selling an idea like the Sahara was similar in that people had great confidence in me and what I said. A year and a half later, I'm at the coast of Senegal in West Africa with a whole team of people, and I'm surrounded by these folks, and they're so excited. Like, we're getting ready to start this big journey. And like, all I can think is, I've suckered all of these people out here, and we're all going to die. Like, and because I don't know what I'm doing. They think I know what I'm doing because I told them I know what I'm doing. But like, there's no, you and I both live in proximity to the Appalachian Trail. The Appalachian Trail is very, very hard, but you can go to Barnes and Noble and buy a dozen books or REI and learn how to do it and see where to camp and how to. There's no book for the Sahara Desert. And so this journey, though, ended up taking 111 days. And for 111 days, me and my two teammates ran 2 marathons every single day for 111 days straight in 140-degree temperatures, and just a crazy, amazing experience. And it changed all of our lives. And for me, some of that was amazing and great, and some of it was also, it made me a target in some other ways. So,
I'm
like
going to let
most
you,
things in life, it's a double-edged sword.
I want to let you keep going, but we're going to go back to the Sahara because I have a couple questions. I want to go into that, but keep going through your timeline, because I think it will set the listener up to really have a good grasp of, your energy is contagious. So one of the things that you're discounting is not just that you're a good salesperson, but you were trained, even if you maybe didn't recognize it early on, but people that grow up too fast are often really good at understanding how people not only take information, but receive it internally. Like, you could see things around your mom, around the castmates, around college campuses that most people didn't see until they were much older. So you've been researching things that are different. Then you have this energy that's contagious and unique, and that draws people into you. And so, yes, you might not know what the hell you're doing, but you also have an energy and a confidence that makes people want to do it with you. Believe me, they're probably thinking the same thing, Charlie, that you were thinking. Does this guy even know what the hell he's saying? Like, is he serious? So
Yeah, no,
anyway,
dude, I appreciate everything you just said. Yeah, thank you, because that is I mean, look, it is the truth. It's my enthusiasm and my energy is it's natural, it's organic. Like, it's not, I don't have, when I ran across the Sahara, like, after the fact, I looked like I had a great plan, because not only did we do the run, but I also started with Matt Damon something called H2O Africa. I raised about $6 million for clean water. Today, that nonprofit is known as water.org, and it's the world's largest clean water nonprofit with over 2 billion in donations at this point. And it all came out of the simple idea that I just wanted to see if I could run across the Sahara Desert. It wasn't more complicated than that. In my heart, I wanted to find out if I could do it. Like, and I didn't care who saw it or didn't see it. I just wanted to do that. And I do believe that the people around me and who believed in the project were feeding off that energy and enthusiasm, as you say. I do give myself credit for that. And I don't, it's not, you can't manufacture that kind of thing. I think you can learn. People who maybe don't have that naturally can learn through practice how to have more confidence and feel and project that kind of confidence to other people. But I was lucky enough, at least, to have that part of it, I think, naturally.
You also had the power of an idea. So what's really interesting about this, and we'll go to the Sahara later, but the power of the idea surrounded by people that could actually make it come to fruition. So the thing is that imagine the ideas that go to that are just disposed of all the time because people hang out in the wrong crowds or with the wrong people or the low energy. And like, this is what
Yeah.
listeners should be paying attention to, that when you put yourself in the right setting, your ideas can even be crazy. But if you have the
Yeah.
right people around you, they can help you execute them. And those crazy ideas can become something that changes the world. Literally,
Yeah.
water has changed the world.
Yeah, well, if it's a bad idea or not a robust, dynamic idea, I don't care how good your PowerPoint is, you're not gonna get anybody on board. And I hate, I mean, I literally hate doing PowerPoints, and I understand that kind of stuff is building decks and all that is part of the process sometimes, but I will not waste my time doing that until I verbally told somebody the idea. Like, the
Right.
very first thing they see is a deck, I'm not interested in that kind of process. I want to be able to articulate it to you, and if I don't see that light shining in your eyes that says, holy crap, that's I like that idea. I'm gonna talk about that another idea in a little while, but then no amount of assets on top of that are going to make it interesting. So I mean, again, if you don't believe it in your heart and want to do it, and too often people get attached to, and I tell my kids this, they're both grown now, but they grew up hearing me say, attachments and people getting attached to outcomes before they've even developed the idea is maybe the biggest detriment to success. Because too often during the process, we passionately want to do something, and that's an emotional response, and then we rationalize it by coming up with all the reasons that it makes sense and all of that. And I mean, it boils down to the passion part of it. And if you don't have that, you cannot possibly, create the other parts of it. So I just remind people that people ask me all the time with the Sahara, before the expedition, they would say, why are you doing this? What do you hope to get out of it? And at that point, because it's been a few years now, I tried to come up with good answers because I felt like I had to, for sponsors or for investors or whatever. Now I'm like, I ask me the why when I'm finished, because the fact is, I don't care if you're launching a new business, you're starting a family, you're entering into a new important relationship in your life, it never turns out the way you think it was going to. And usually it's either much better or sometimes much worse. But to always be attached to, like, here's what I want or here's why I'm doing it, the why needs to start here, and then it can potentially go to your wallet or to your to other places. But
Well,
it doesn't, to me, it just
I
doesn't
love
work in
that.
the reverse.
I love it because what you're saying is people get attached to the outcomes, not the stuff that goes into the outcome. And you really have to be attached to the daily activity. You have to be attached to the journey. And if you get too attached to the outcome, the other things that happen, a lot of times you are impatient and you rush the outcome. So you'll see people who start to see some level of success and they start buying stuff they can't afford because they know one day they will be able to afford it. So they're only working towards the money. They're only working towards the
Yeah.
end result. And so that rushed outcome is impatience. But when you're in love with the journey, when you actually love what you're creating every day, if you took it one marathon at a time, you
Hmm.
knew you could get through this.
Yeah. And I think it's also about risk. A lot of people are risk averse, or they think they are. Wow. I had a conversation last week with a woman who had run, she's in her 60s, amazing athlete. We just ran into each other. I was in Costa Rica, and we're having this conversation, and I'm like, so athletically, I can tell you're in shape. What do you do? She's like, oh, I've done like 60 triathlons, all Olympic distance triathlons, never anything longer. And I said, when's your next one? She's like, oh, I have one next week. And I said to her, are you worried? Like, when you step to the start line next week, are you going to be concerned about whether or not you can finish the triathlon? And she's like, no. Absolutely not. I've done 60 of them, whatever. I said, do you remember your first one? She's like, oh yeah. How did that feel? And she really went, she was like, she almost like got pale. She was like, oh God, I was scared to death. I thought I was going to drown, in the swim and fall off my bike and all this stuff. And I said, don't you miss that? Because once you've done something, and I'm not saying you don't repeat that a few times, but I think we all have a fairly bad habit of falling into patterns of comfort. We accomplish something, and that accomplishment was so meaningful to us, and then we go about repeating it over and over and over. Now, if it's your business and it's putting money in your bank account, who am I to say that's not the right thing to do? But there should be something that you're saying to yourself, holy shit, I have no idea if I'm capable of doing this thing, and I can't wait to get to the start line because it's going to be terrifying. Like that
It's
is
it's growing.
so important.
I mean, that's growing. At the end of the day, if you're not growing, you're dying. And so that's been attributed to Lou Holtz and many other people. But the reality is you're talking about stretching your goals. And what happens when we age, especially, is that people start to diminish their abilities in their brain. And they start to say, I can't do that anymore. I met with a friend of mine yesterday who I played soccer with forever. And he's like, I don't know if I could keep going, man. I just go too hard when I do it. And I said, listen, you could change the way you play. That might be the challenge. Maybe the challenge is actually falling in love with playing, not falling in love with winning. And that's hard for someone who's always been a winner and only likes the outcome of winning. And that's how I grew up. That's how I've thought most of my life. I really struggle sometimes to go into a setting to play for fun. But the older I got, I shifted to, okay, you can't do everything you used to do and you're going to get beat. But now it's a matter of staying in shape and challenging yourself and finding a new goal. And what you're talking about is not getting in the comfort and the monotony of the same thing, because you're not really stretching your boundaries or showing yourself, your mind, your body, your soul, what you can do and how well you could still do it.
Yeah, beautifully said. I mean, it's really just it's certain amount of it is based in risk, and I think we thrive on risk as an addict, in nature. I definitely thrive on a certain amount of risk, and that happens in business. It happens in athletics. It happens in a lot of places, but it's always calculated, and I'm not going to Vegas and putting my life savings on black. I mean, I'm just doing things that I know are going to continue to make me want. I just turned 60 a few months ago, and I want to continue to explore longevity, but not longevity for longevity's sake. I don't have any interest in just living 10 extra years, just to be breathing. I want to keep climbing mountains and running marathons or whatever it is that I'm doing, and finding, as you get older, the same challenges do become appealing, because I am, now when I step to the line of 100 miler, I will admit there's some fear, can I actually do this again? And
So it comes back, the older we get, the harder some of the things that you used to do with ease become
totally.
just, and it's also because so much. I mean, most people, the older they get, they start to shut things down. They start to say, I heard my dad, who hates the flu shots, and he hates like anything that's not natural. That's been my father my whole life. And a week or two ago, he was like, I think I'm going to get a flu shot. I'm just getting older. And I was like, Dad, please stop with this language. Like, that language alone. So what if you get the flu, dude? You'll be sick. Maybe
Yeah,
you'll be sicker for a couple of days. I'm
yeah,
not telling anybody not to get it, but when the human behind it mentally is what I'm
yeah,
talking about, not whether or not you think a flu shot
totally.
is good or bad, but
Yeah,
mentally, that's a shift that I don't want to see in my father.
totally. Well, I also see, and there's more to my story I'll get to in a minute, but I see that you're a fellow. I'm actually on Whoop's advisory board, and
Oh,
so yeah,
really?
so I could see it on your arm. So I've been on their advisory board for a while, and
Three
you know,
years I've been wearing this thing. I don't take it
nice.
off. I live
Congrats,
and die
brother.
by the data. I think it's one of the greatest things. And if you have addictive personalities, let's not even say that everybody's an addict, but there's so many people that are addicted to work, to so many other things that may be more appropriate. So this device is accountability every single day. I mean, I love it. I think it's amazing.
Yeah, well, and I'm thrilled to hear you say that, and we'll talk more about it. But I love what you just said too about the accountability piece, because that's really what the device is. And about 5 years ago, I wasn't wearing a Whoop, but about 5 years ago, I committed myself to getting better sleep. Like I made I don't know if it was Scott Hyman, or I don't even remember who it was, but it was one of the people I really admire out there, Andrew Huberman, maybe, who was talking. I was listening to a podcast, and it was just like hearing him talk about sleep and boiling it down to, the simple metrics of how much you can improve your athletic life, your sexual life, your business life, your, and like it was science, it wasn't conjecture. And I said, and I did in a way what I did all the way back in the day when I got sober. I said, all right, I'm going to take a period of time, like these next 30 days, I think is probably what I said. And I said, I am going to be in that freaking bed for 8 hours. I don't know what's going to happen. Like, because I was the typical, I'm special and I really don't need all that much. Like, 5 hours of sleep is all I need.
6 hours max, all I need.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm kicking everybody's ass. Well, maybe I was, but how much better could I be if I actually got a full night's sleep? And almost immediately, within a couple of weeks, things started dramatically improving. And I mean, every aspect of my life, and what I realized is that, this feels a little self-congratulatory, but if I'm a high functioning person in general, and like my 80% is as good as a lot of people's 90 or 100, okay, that's great. But then what if I can actually get to 90% or 100% efficiency some days, where I've slept great, I feel good, the workouts I did yesterday and the week before, and the hydration and the good eating and all of those things, sleep becomes the linchpin of letting all of that good habits and energy, take root in my body. And now having, Whoop, and there's, I'm on their advisory board, but look, there's a lot of wearables out there that, if you're committed and you learn how to read the data, or more importantly, I coach hundreds of people in this space, primarily with addiction recovery issues, because what I have begun to say is, because I understand the data on these things very well, and I know how to look at trending information, I can predict relapse. Like if I have a person, especially in early recovery, who's willing to let me look at their data and coach them, then I can see a relapse coming weeks or months away, because it's all built into the habits, it's built into their lifestyle. And a lot of times that stuff happens in the dark. So just bear with me for a second.
No, I'm super interested in this. I love this because I feel like, are you looking at heart rate variability? Are you looking at the declines in, because I could look at the last 6 months it's been really busy launching a podcast, doing all these different things, still running the company. Every single month I go down by a point. And so I'm in December, I'm in a recharge mode, and I'm like, hey, you got to focus on this. Sleep's got to get better, because you're progressing in a space that will crash you versus build you where you want to be. Even high performers need to know where their limits are.
Yeah, well, not all these things you're working hard on they may not crash, but they're certainly not going to be the best that they could be if you're not the best that you can be. And so it is about trending information and HRV. Obviously, if it's a person in early recovery and I see something as simple as I see they didn't sleep well for a couple nights in a row, I'm at least going to text them and say, hey, looks like you're not sleeping great. Here's a meditation from Deepak Chopra. Why don't you give this a try? Here's the point. you said it, it's an accountability tool. I don't care if they do the meditation or not, but I have told them that I see them. And a person in early recovery in particular feels very isolated and lonely quite often. And even if they've got like a sponsor or a mentor, addicts are complicated. People are complicated. We lie to the people in our lives with the simple things like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. Everything's fine. Well, you know what? This thing doesn't have any feelings. It
No,
doesn't lie. It just gives information.
facts. It's
And
just facts.
exactly. And so if you know what you're looking at as a coach and you can see this trending information, you have a chance of gently turning that person 45 degrees and instead of continuing to head in that direction, because people are stubborn, man. We don't want to admit when we're hurting. We don't want to admit when we're not feeling it. And so used in the right context, it can really, really help people. So that's a large part of the mission that I'm on these days is in the addiction recovery space. I work with a treatment center in Maryland, actually called Ashley Addiction Treatment Center, and they are part of like, so there's them, there's Hazel and Betty Ford, there's Karen, there's Cumberland Heights. These are all kind of the premier nonprofit treatment centers in the country, and I'm involved in a couple of studies with Johns Hopkins right now, and we're putting these devices on addicts the day they come into treatment. And what the information is. Just imagine therapists being able to see this information real time rather than just going through this long process of yes, talk therapy and trauma therapy is hugely important, but physical health and moving your freaking body will make you feel better. And if you can see it and sort of see the results, I give Fitbit a lot of credit, right? 10 years ago or however long, longer than that probably, people started counting their steps.
Their steps,
That
right?
was like that was like kindergarten for wearables. And now there's a lot of wearables that are much more sophisticated. And it's life-changing for a lot of people. So
It's
I'm
been
gonna
life.
I'm gonna
It's
switch gears.
Well,
I'm talking.
before I want you to go into that, I just want to tell you it's been life-changing for me because when I started my company in 2016, I had many years ago, I had been diagnosed with colitis and I had no issues until 2016 when I'm stressed out. What I learned is my brain shuts off and has no problem with stress. Like I say this, we all feel it, but my brain tells me I'm fine. My body starts to panic from the inside out. So 2020 comes around. I'm now wearing the Whoop. I'm tracking sleep. I'm tracking all these things. I have no issues, went into remission, completely changed my entire dynamic. Now I've done it with the sunlight and sauna, and I do the cold plunge, and I do a million things, and none of them by themselves are enough. But the one thing that is as valuable to me as anything is I know that if I had 1 or 2 glasses of wine, what it does to my recovery the next day. So like, I know if I don't move, if I don't drink water, if I don't do so all of a sudden the accountability piece is life-changing, not just for people listening, but personally, it's been a major change for me. And I have so many of my friends wearing this thing now that, it's awesome. So I do want you to shift gears because you went to prison for a little while, and that's kind of worth mentioning because you drew so much attention to who you were, what you were doing, literally changing the world with the water organization with Matt Damon, that somebody took a special interest in your credit application. And I want you to just give us a little insight, and we don't have to spend too much time on this because the high performance stuff is way more interesting to me, but it's still awesome.
Well, it's funny, Scott. I always like I mean, if I'm on a stage, I do all of Tony Robbins stages, and I do a lot of cool opportunities around speaking. And I mean, I always talk about the prison piece because the last thing I want, number one, it's not something I'm like ashamed of, but number two, the last thing I want is a listener to Google me later thinking, oh, that guy's pretty cool. And then like, hey, wait a minute. But look, like you said, the Sahara really put me on the map. I was on I had my 15 minutes. I was on Jay Leno and NPR and all the morning news shows, and I got an agent, and I started speaking all over the world, and I just got a lot of really great opportunities in that space. And then the film came out a little later, Running the Sahara. Matt Damon narrated, and it brought more attention. And I mean, in short, I was living in Greensboro, North Carolina, smallish town, not a tiny town, but typical North Carolina town. And a single IRS agent in Greensboro, North Carolina, was not impressed with my running or my charitable work, and he just took it upon himself to open an investigation into my taxes. That led nowhere because I pay my taxes. And I know all this because we went to trial, not to bury the lead here, but like we went to trial because I became the only person in the United States at the time, this is 2010, to be charged with overstating my income on a home loan application. And for that, I could get 20 years in federal prison. And I knew I hadn't done it, first of all, first and foremost. And I decided that I was going to fight it, even though nobody fights the feds, quite simply because you're going to lose.
Right.
I do hate to say this, based on where you live, but this took place in the Eastern District of Virginia, and my trial was in Norfolk. So, because this one single property was on the eastern shore of Virginia, where my mother was living, and anyway, I'm going to just cut to the chase. I ended up at trial being found not guilty of providing false information on a loan application because the mortgage broker, in my case, got on the stand and admitted that he forged a loan application without my knowledge, and he signed my name to it. Like, one would think that's like game over.
Yeah.
But I signed the closing package, which included this false loan application. And basically by signing it, I was attesting to everything in the closing package. Whether I knew it was there or not, it didn't matter. I was in California when I signed it. I put it in the mail and I mailed it back to Norfolk, Virginia Beach, to my attorney, and that became mail fraud. And I was found guilty of mail fraud, a pure technicality, and I was sentenced to 21 months in federal prison, and in Beckley, West Virginia, of all places.
I've been to Beckley, West Virginia. I know Beckley. Yes.
There you go. If you want addiction, obesity, prescription pill, I mean, I'm not trying to pick on West Virginia, but that is it's the epicenter of the universe for these things. But anyway, look, my kids dropped me off at the front gate of prison on Valentine's Day 2011, and to begin serving my sentence. And to be clear, the day after, people think cancel culture is like a new thing. The day after I was arrested, not convicted, the day after I was arrested, I was on the front page of the New York Times, because I basically was the only person in the country being held accountable for the mortgage meltdown. No bankers, no real estate people, none of the people who actually caused this crisis were being held accountable.
They wanted success. They wanted a success story, not the things that were happening, which were all the people that were lying about their applications and getting houses they couldn't afford, and then getting into trouble, and the mortgage brokers and everybody doing it for them. They wanted someone who had it all, who didn't need the extra lift that made their story valuable. So that's why you're on the cover of the Times.
No doubt. Well, we don't have time for this. It's in my book if people want to read it. But
the book is Running Man, right?
Exactly. Yeah. One slight step further, though, is, look, the government was trying to stimulate the economy, and basically they dropped all due diligence from. So the interesting thing is, it's the government that changed all the rules and said, look, basically, if you have a pulse, you can get a loan and you can buy a house. And then further down the road, when everything predictably fell apart, it's the government again who's like trying to hold people accountable. But of course, they don't hold themselves accountable. They stimulated the economy, but they also drove a lot of people into bankruptcy and having their lives financially ruined. And we all know everybody was affected by, it wasn't
Sure.
just the US too. Everybody in the world was affected by, our government policies basically. But despite all of that, I mean, here's where the good stuff comes. I go to prison and I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm scared, because despite my 10 years of, kind of street life, I'd never been to prison, really never even been to jail. And I'm really pissed off. I'm pissed off about what had been done to me, basically. And it took about a minute for me to gain perspective. When the guy in the cell next to me, African American, 62 years old, had a 25-year sentence for 1 single gram of crack cocaine, 2 minor shoplifting charges earlier, and his third offense was 1 gram, this much crack cocaine, an amount I had had in my pocket hundreds of times. And he gets a 25-year sentence. And, I stand in front of big audiences and a lot of very big white audiences. And I say, what do you think the difference is between me and him? And I mean, I draw very direct, lines between these things. If you think that justice is an equitable situation for people of different colors and different economic status, I mean, I was also in Beckley with a ton of white meth addicts who also got huge
Right.
sentences. Like, we are the only country on the planet that incarcerates, and I mean incarcerates for a long time, it's people with drug problems. Like, it doesn't, you've never met anyone that got their act together in prison. Like, it doesn't, you get worse in prison. Now, okay, granted, there might be the 19-year-old kid, black or white or whatever, who, he probably should have joined the army or something, but like, maybe it sort of turned his life around to a degree. But in general, instead of sending people to treatment or giving them help, we put them in prison.
Right.
So anyway, I'm going to scoot ahead on this. I got to prison and I did what I always do. I started running because the only thing I knew how to do. And by myself, there's 500 men in this prison. Weren't really any runners per se, maybe a couple guys. By the time I left there a year and a half later, I had a running group of 50 men running with me every single day. I had a dozen guys that lost more than 100 pounds.
Wow.
We're doing yoga on the softball field 3 days a week, which is hilarious. I'm glad nobody saw that. And the point is, my first sponsor way back in the day taught me one very important lesson, and it was this simple sentence: to keep it, you have to give it away. And that lesson is so boiled down and simple. In prison, the day I finally left, people are hugging me and crying and thanking me for what I did for them. I didn't do anything for them. To keep my own sanity, sobriety, humanity, I had an opportunity to help other people with the one thing I knew how to do. So to keep it, you have to give it away. If you've got a gift, a skill, money, whatever it is that you've got, and you're not freely giving it to other people without expectation of like a ROI, of a return, why do you have it? And that's the lesson that I was able to reinforce while I was in there. And I mean, it sounds crazy to say it, but like, even if I could go back and change that, I don't think that I would at this point. I don't think I would eliminate prison because I got perspective. I got to understand what was going on. So I am a huge advocate for justice, and in particular, changing some things about, even the tough on crime people, if they really understood the financial cost of what it takes to keep so many people in prison rather than putting them in alternative programs, they wouldn't want to do it anymore.
Right.
Because you take a 19-year-old black kid and put him in prison for 5 years with a felony, that guy's probably going to be on public assistance for the rest of his life. So it's not, what lesson did we teach? It's like, the lesson is we're going to be paying forever for this person who can't get a good job because he always has to check the felon box.
Yeah. So
So
sometimes I think sometimes in in life or in systems and companies and anything, it's just the way it's always been done. And the way it's
yeah,
always been done might have been something that had a twinkle of hope in the beginning, but it's gotten so far away from the truth. And now it's so broken that it's like education. I mean, I don't have enough time to talk about this, but I hate the factory setting. My wife is a kindergarten teacher, and
Yeah.
they are babysitting. They're feeding children things that in education today that I can get it from Alexa or Siri in 5 seconds. Like,
Yeah.
we are still teaching useless things every single day instead of helping people identify how to be accountable to themselves, create a routine. Like, the things that you learn to get out of addiction are the things that help people in general function in life. I mean, it's
Yeah.
amazing. And so tell me this. I know we have limited time, and we could always pick another conversation up later, but because I love talking to you, man. I want to understand, you get out of prison, you have all these friends, all these people that you've met, and you've picked yourself back up. You're back on the road. You're teaching, you're telling the world about what's going on. You're helping people again. Catch us up to today.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do want to say congrats to your wife, and I applaud her. And like, if we just doubled the salaries of all teachers, that vocation would begin to attract people like your wife who would
Yeah.
stay in this, and who would spend the rest of their lives teaching kids, and it would pay off 1,000,000 times over, because our kids would be educated. So I just had to say that.
I'd be all
But
for her
yes,
making double. I'd be all for her making double.
yeah,
I
yeah,
also would love to see a performance assessment, because she's
yeah,
been the best teacher at almost every school she's ever been at. And I am biased, so our listeners will know, but I know what goes into it. And I know the best teachers perform and set a standard. There should be some level of rewarding, systematic approaches that provide the level. In any other company,
yeah,
if someone at at Whoop or a great company is performing and doing great things, you want to elevate them, because that's the example. You were elevating people in prison by just your example, and that is
yeah,
contagious. So
yeah.
I love, we could
Thank
talk
you.
about this all day.
Yeah. Well, look, I'll boil it down to a very simple sentence. I own my history. And what I mean by that is addiction, recovery, prison. I've had DNFs and races. I ran across the United States years ago and failed miserably to accomplish my goals. I do it all publicly. You know why? Because nobody cares. Not really. We think that everyone is focused on us and what we're doing and all that. They're not. We're all focused on ourselves primarily. That is our focus, and we think that other people are spending way more time thinking about us than they really are. So my way, and this goes back to the beginning of our conversation, my way of owning it is to share the struggle, is to tell people that addiction sucked. Here are some of the things I went through. Here's the struggle I had to actually get my life together. I didn't just wake up one day and magically, like, ooh, I'm not going to drink anymore, right? I didn't get out of prison and go hide in a corner, or decide I'm not going to be a public person anymore, because what I got the chance to see was this very dysfunctional program. I mean, there's some people in prison that probably belong there, some if you're violent, if there's certain tendencies, yeah, but the rest of it is just a machine. It's a business. Like,
Right.
we built a lot of prisons, and we need to make sure they need to stay full. I mean, it's not more complicated than that. And there's a whole lot of people that rely on that industry, and lobbyists and politicians, just like with education and big pharma and food and every other place. We think all this stuff is happening naturally. No, there's huge pressures and big money behind every major issue in our country these days. So I took all that and just said, I'm just going to go out and keep telling this story. I own the fact too, though, Scott, that I made mistakes. Like, I went to prison for something that I shouldn't have, but I also laid the groundwork. I built some of the platform of that house of cards for myself.
Right,
So I
right.
own some responsibility in making myself vulnerable in that situation. And I made some poor business choices. Well, most people don't go to prison for a bad business choice,
Right.
but what I decided to do was the more that I can get on stages and talk about the struggle, sure, there's some successes too, but the more I can talk the struggle, the better. So as we're wrapping up, I want to tell you, while I was locked up, I had this other idea, another bad idea, basically, that I wanted to take the metaphor, like you and I, everybody listening is on this never ending roller coaster of low places and high points,
Yeah.
right? That's the human condition. I decided I wanted to put a literal spin on that and that I would become the first person to ever go from the lowest place on the planet, the Dead Sea, to the top of Mount Everest. So in January of 2024, about a year from now, I am going to start this expedition. I have amazing partners, a group called Aerial Recovery that is in a Green Beret friend of mine started it with his wife, and so it's veteran support, it's natural disaster rescue and anti-human trafficking. Those are the pillars of this organization.
Awesome.
I'm going to start in the Dead Sea. I'm going to stand up paddleboard across the Dead Sea. I'm going to do a free dive in the Dead Sea to the lowest place I can reach. Then I'm going to run 2,000 miles across the Arabian desert to the tip of Oman. And then I'm going to get into a boat and I'm going to row 1,000 miles across the Indian Ocean. And in Mumbai, India, I'll get on a mountain bike and ride 2,000 miles to the base of Mount Everest. And then it's just, 2 or 3 miles to get to the top. So, and I'm going to make a film and a series. We're talking to networks and write another book and continue to talk about the need for big challenges and sharing your struggles with the world and not just your successes.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So how do you go up from Matt Damon? Is that Tom Hanks that narrates the next one? I mean, I don't know. I would have said Will Smith a year ago, but I mean,
Right.
I don't really know who can do it unless you might have to call Matt again and have him narrate the next one. So,
Yeah.
maybe you
We'll
can get
see. We'll see. Maybe I need a no name out there, but I'm a pretty ugly runner these days, so it's not like it's not going to be hard to emulate my running style.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're doing something really important, and that is you just said it, and I want the listeners to really pay attention to this because you're highlighting that life is full of ups and downs. Struggle is a part of everyone's life. What you're going through right now is exactly where you're supposed to be. How you choose to get up tomorrow is going to be the difference maker. What you choose to do. Do you get up and run every day? Do you get up and do a routine that makes you feel better? Are you accountable for what you do? And what you're doing is you're showing them that even the hardest things in the world that anyone could dream up, you're going to try. And at the end of the day, you're not afraid to fail. It doesn't seem to me like you're afraid to fail. What it seems to me like it's about the act and the journey that you're putting your energy into. And that's why people continue to be attracted to your mission, your story, and everything you're trying to accomplish.
No, I mean, thank you so much for saying that. And I mean, I say the same to you because there's a saying we have in addiction recovery that's attraction rather than promotion. And one of the things I try to never do is start a sentence with the words, you should, because it's not my place to tell anybody else what to do. My job is to do things, take on challenges, whatever that might be, also in my marriage and other like just normal parts of life, but try to be transparent and open about the good times and the struggles.
Yeah.
And that attraction, rather than me saying this is how you should do it, like which unless you've asked me specifically, or unless I've asked you specifically, I don't want, not that I don't want your opinion, but like I'm not, I don't want to hear about religion or politics or any of those stuff. Like I don't want to hear. If I want to know your opinion on
I'll
that, I'll
ask.
ask you.
Yeah.
And if I don't, then I'm going to observe you. And that's what we all do. And it's the place that I think it's a thing that's gotten lost in our society is we are all mentors and we are all mentees, even if it's not a formal relationship, even if you don't tell, although I do suggest telling a person, if you observe somebody and you like the way they conduct themselves, the way they handle the situation, whatever it is, tell them. Tell them. Just say, "Look, I watched what you did right there, and I really enjoy." Because we'll damn sure tell that person that they suck or that they, did something we don't like. But it's rare for us to go up to them and just say, "Look, I don't know you, but I just watched you do this thing and how you handled this certain situation, and I really thought it was amazing." And we go through every day taking those little nuggets. If you're a person that is curious and you want to keep growing, you take those little nuggets from each person that you meet and interact with, just like I have. Hopefully, we both have today, and you take that back into your world, into your arena, and you try to share some of those things with the people that you care about. And I think that, if we can do more of if we can do more doing and less talking about doing, and less criticizing, usually the critic is sitting on the sofa,
Yeah.
criticizing. And if you want to criticize, then get your ass out here next to me and then tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Well, there's a couple things I'll say to close. And number one is Nike would never have made it if their slogan was just try it. Their slogan is just do it for a reason. And everybody that thinks that you could just try it has never actually done anything. So this is something we talk about all the time. I also, as a mentor, every mentor situation I've ever been in where I'm the leader, I have learned more from my mentee than they even know. If you are a true mentor, you are open to the frequency of learning in every capacity. And I also love the fact that we should be telling people, which is what you just said, when you see something empowering, something good. This is something that lacks way too much in our world. I found out the other day, I do an auction for my kids' Catholic school. It is challenging. It's like standing on stage at the worst comedy club, getting tomatoes thrown at you while you get people to bid. I mean, it is challenging, but we raised more money that night than ever. But the best part of the night for me was a mom that came up to me with her husband and thanked me for interrupting their conversation like 3 or 4 years earlier when they had just moved to the area, and telling them about the school that their kids were in, because it literally has changed the trajectory of the way they educate their kids and what they're doing. And had I not inserted myself in something that most people would say, stay out of their business, don't say, I heard them talking and it was an interesting concept. And I said, hey, if you're talking about Catholic school, let me tell you where I think is really great. My kids go, and I know you didn't ask me, and come to find out they go, their kids go there. It's a really cool thing. And I love what your mission is, Charlie. I love what you're doing. If our listeners want to find you, where do they find you and get more of this so they can be a part of your mission?
Super easy. It's just my website, and it's just my name, charlieengle.com. All the social media links are on there. There's a couple of my latest talks. I was the keynote at Dave Asprey's biohacking conference a couple months ago. And, so that talk is now on there along with some others. You can buy my book on there if you want something that's actually signed. Then I'm happy to personalize something. And by the way, man, you already know this. The book's called Running Man. It's not a prescriptive title. It's not a how to run book. It's hopefully a how to, live a more full and robust life. But anything that you want to know, and I will also say, it's my phone number, it's my email address that's on my website. It comes to me. So, if somebody wants to talk more about addiction and recovery, or about running, or about taking on some big adventure, reach out. I respond to everybody and everything that I can.
Well, I can't thank you enough for being a guest today. Who knows, listeners, maybe I will be the voice of his next journey. You never know. But today, Charlie Engle, thanks for blessing us with your time, man. Have a great day.
My pleasure. Talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening. Hope you really enjoyed the podcast. Click here because I had a great conversation with Dave Sanderson of the Miracle on the Hudson. Hope you enjoy that too.